Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and The Daily Critique. Today's image was created by Robert, who's an intermediate photographer. Robert shot this with a Canon 40D, an effective focal length of 28 millimeters. The exposure trio is ISO 640, f6.3, and 1/125th of a second. Just wanted to mention the shutter speed and just give you a tip that you might work with if you're a landscape photographer and you like shooting water. When I'm teaching workshops where we have moving water as a subject matter, could be a fast running river, could be the ocean with surf action like we're seeing here, really encourage photographers that they're shooting from the tripod to give themselves a lot of options. First of all, just in terms of different frames, because the water is obviously a very dynamic subject. It's constantly changing. It's constantly moving, so that there are different shapes that are being implied in different areas of high energy, different qualities of line. In this particular frame, Robert's got a really beautiful combination out in this area of leading line here with the water that looks like it's moving out, and then a couple of waves breaking here, and there's a real nice implied diagonal that leads up to the main subject of the lighthouse. Just before this or just after this, these ideas may have been in different places. It may have made the image have a completely different feeling. It might not have worked as well with the main subject. And so just really encourage you to give yourself a lot of options. The other thing that you can play around with is you could play around with your shutter speed to the extent that you could stop motion in some frames and then imply motion with a much slower shutter speed in other frames, and then you could blend those. You could blend all of those ideas. If you kept shooting from the tripod, you could basically, using different pieces, different layers, different moments in time, and also different expressions of time, you could create sort of whatever kind of surface of water that you wanted. And you'd have to be open, obviously, to compositing, using multiple moments in time to build one image. But I definitely wanted to mention those ideas in the context of Robert's beautiful image. You know, Robert shot at 1/125th of a second. He's freezing the surface of the water, stopping it here, and that says a lot about the power of the ocean. And clearly we could move in another direction with a slower shutter speed, like a 15th or an 8th or a quarter of a second. And then we could blend a shutter speed of a quarter of a second with a much faster shutter speed and combine the feeling of texture and high energy with something that's much softer and more elegant in another frame, the longer shutter speed. A lot of things that I like about Robert's image. He's created this image in twilight, which means that the lighthouse has actually come on. That adds a lot to the image. It also means that the light is soft, so that there's not a heavy lighting pattern to compete with the feeling of the lighthouse against the sky. I'm really enjoying the way the darker clouds are backing the main subject. Really helps it to come forward. Really like Robert's framing from top to bottom. He's in camera cropped the sky in a way where very simple along the edge, and then you have a few ideas that get metered out here at the very end. Same thing in the lower part of the frame. Is a real simple frame, very dark, and then you have a few areas that are metered out of bright that break that up. Very similar to the top, so there's not only a really nice feeling of balance from top to bottom, there's also a real nice feeling of the eye being contained. And the same thing over here, very, very dark, and that's helping to contain my eye and keep me in the area of the main subject. In this moment, I've already mentioned this down in here, but there's quite a bit of line that leads into the main subject, and that works really well to lead the viewer to where Robert is trying to take them. This is a picture of a lighthouse, and he's got really beautiful leading line here, this line in the water we already talked about, and then not just contouring lines that outline shapes that move us toward the main subject, but also the implication of line. If we talk about connecting the dots from one high energy point to the next, it's a really nice leading line. Lots of things to enjoy about the image. When it comes to a perfect world variation, I want to do a couple of things to this image. One of the things that happens for me is that I get pulled away from the lighthouse by a couple of things. This area of the image gets very light compared to everything else over here. Our eye is drawn first to the area or areas of highest contrast, and that could either be the difference between very bright and dark, very warm and cool. It could also be conceptual. Everything in an image could be smooth, and then there's an area of texture, and that's very high contrast because conceptually it's different, and that draws our eye. But our eye goes first to the area of high contrast, next to bright areas, after that to warm areas, then cool areas, and last to areas that are dark, the shadow areas. this area of the image over here is bright, and then you have this real high frequency color, a real sort of saturated peach. And both of those concepts start to pull me over here. And if this is the main subject, and I think it is, then I would want to contain the eye and keep moving the eye in this direction. So I want to darken over in here. I'm going to desaturate this color a little bit, and I'm going to pump up the saturation a little bit on the Lighthouse itself, and I'm going to add a little bit more low end to some of the blacks in the image. I'm going to give the blacks a little bit more of a feeling of low end and being rich, and when that happens, it can help the other color ideas in the image to have more vibrancy. It's a good idea to copy your background in your workflow. There's just some things you can't do to the background itself. If I'm just on the background and I haven't copied it, for instance, I can't go to transform, and there are other things that aren't available. So we want to copy the background. I used a technique today for darkening over in here that I use some of the time. Mostly I would use curves, but there's sometimes when I'll use this technique as well. It's nice because it's an additive technique. It's not like making a curves adjustment and filling the mask with black and then painting with white. It's a way to just start making places darker as you're moving the paintbrush, and this is how it works. Let's create a blank layer. Put that layer into soft light blending mode. Hit B for the brush, and then go to a very low opacity, 10% or lower. And then where I paint now, I'm going to be darkening. And you can see that happening as I paint. You can see 10% is pretty strong. I've chosen 10% so you can really see what's happening as I move the brush. This can be a really nice way, an additive way, to make things darker. So it's just painting with dark, and I can see it as I'm making these moves. And you can see that 10% is a little too much. Anybody that's watched many of my videos at all knows that when I'm making changes, painting, that I like to use a very soft brush, the largest brush that I can, and paint at very low opacities. Start with very subtle changes and build those up so that there's never one brush stroke that can call attention to itself like that. I'm going to go ahead and throw this away because I've already done the work that I wanted to do on one layer. Here it is. You can see how you feel about the difference, and before and after. And if we turn the background copy and the background off, you can see this really subtle blend of black pixels that's happening here in soft light blending mode. The next thing that I did was I desaturated this high frequency color there, that peach, and that's before, and that is after the desaturation. Then I added a little saturation to the Lighthouse. And this is where we started, and this is where we ended up. You know, one of the things that can really help you in your editing, if you're working traditionally, and by that I mean you're seeing things that are beautiful to your eye and you want to photograph them in a beautiful way, is just keep asking yourself the question, what is the main subject? And think about the ways that you can emphasize that and bring it forward, and let the viewer know how to move and where to go, and also to contain the eye around the main subjects. And a very simple way to do that is to darken around your main ideas, and to also look at the image and see if there are other areas that are very high value because they're high contrast, or because they're very bright, or because it's a very high frequency color. These are the things that draw the eye the most, and if we have those subjects in a picture and they're not leading to the main idea, but they're competing with it or pulling away, then we can lower the contrast in an area, we can darken an area, or we can desaturate real high frequency colors. And that's what I've done today to try and move the eye more towards the main subject. Love to hear your feedback about the video today. I want to say a big thank you to Robert for sharing this really beautiful landscape image with us. Hope to see you again real soon on another episode of the Daily Critique.